The scalpel trembled in Dr. Elena Marchand's hand for just a fraction of a second before steadying. Across the operating table, behind surgical masks and sterile lights, her colleagues waited. The patient's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, kept alive by machines and the collective will of everyone in this room. But Elena wasn't seeing the exposed heart before her. She was seeing red velvet curtains, hearing piano music drift through cigarette smoke, smelling cheap perfume mixed with desperation. "Dr. Marchand," the anesthesiologist's voice cut through the memory, "we're ready when you are." Elena blinked, focused. Her hand moved with absolute certainty now, the tremor gone like it had never existed. She made the first incision with the precision of someone who had fought too hard to be here to let ghosts win. The surgery would take 6 hours. She had trained for 7 years to perform it. But it had taken 32 years of life to earn the right to stand in this room at all. Outside, in the surgical waiting area, a woman sat alone. Her dress was too bright, her makeup too heavy for 9 in the morning. Pearl earrings dangled from ears that had heard too many lies from too many men. Her hands, though weathered and marked with the story of a hard life, were folded in her lap with surprising grace. Margot had never been inside a hospital this clean before. Never thought she'd live to see the day when little Lena would be the one wielding the knife instead of running from it. The receptionist kept glancing at her with thinly veiled judgment. Margot was used to that look. She'd been receiving it for 40 years, but today it slid off her like water off a waxed canvas. Because today her girl was in there saving a life, and that changed everything. The clock on the wall ticked forward. Margot closed her eyes and let herself remember the night it all began. The night a baby's cry echoed through the house of red doors, and every woman inside made a silent vow that would reshape all their futures. 16 years earlier, the brothel on Rue de la Paix wasn't the worst in the city, but it would never be mistaken for respectable. 3 stories of crumbling plaster and fading grandeur, it housed 7 women and 1 unspoken rule: survive however you can, but never lose yourself completely. Margot ran the house with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. She'd been beautiful once, before time and circumstances had carved their signatures into her face. Now she was something more useful than beautiful. She was smart, and she was unmistakably in charge. The night Isabel's baby was born, a winter storm rattled the windows like angry fists demanding entry. Isabel had hidden her pregnancy for 6 months, wearing loose dresses and avoiding the clients who wanted more than conversation. When her water broke during dinner, the women moved with practiced efficiency. They'd all learned to handle emergencies without involving authorities, who would only make things worse. The baby girl arrived at 3 in the morning, screaming her arrival into a world that had no proper place for her. Isabel held her daughter for 11 minutes, long enough to name her Elena, long enough to whisper "I'm sorry" 3 times, long enough to hemorrhage beyond what their makeshift supplies could handle. By dawn, Isabel was gone, and 7 women stood in a circle around a bassinet made from a drawer lined with pillows. "We can't keep her here," said Claudette, the youngest at 23. "This is no place for a child." Her voice cracked on the last word, because she knew what happened to children in places like this. Everyone knew. "Then where?" Margot's question hung in the air like smoke. "An orphanage where she'll be worked to death by age 10? The streets where she'll end up right back here in 15 years? Or worse, sold to a house that doesn't protect their girls the way we do?" Véronique, who read 3 books a week by candlelight, spoke next. "What if we raise her differently? Keep her separate. Protect her from this world while we're still in it. Make her believe she can be something else." "You're talking about raising a child in a brothel and somehow keeping her innocent?" Claudette's laugh was bitter. "That's impossible." "No,"
Margot said slowly, an idea taking shape behind her eyes. It's just very, very difficult. But what in our lives has ever been easy? She looked at each woman in turn. Isabel named her Elena. It means light. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe she knew we'd need to give this baby a different kind of life. The vote was unanimous. They would keep Elena. They would raise her as their collective daughter, and they would shield her from their reality with everything they had, which wasn't money or power, but love and absolute determination. Elena's first memory was colors, not the red velvet red room downstairs, which she was not allowed to see, but the rainbow of scarves that hung in Margot's room like captured sunlight. Margot would let her play with them for hours, draping them over furniture to make tents, twisting them into crowns and capes. "You're a princess," Margot would say, and Elena would believe it completely. She lived on the 3rd floor, in a room that had been converted into a child's sanctuary. The women rotated schedules, so someone was always with her during business hours. During the day, while most of them slept, Elena had lessons. Veronique taught her to read using books stolen from the lending library and never returned. Claudette taught her arithmetic using pearl necklaces as counting beads. Sophie, who'd once worked in a fine house before scandal and poverty brought her down, taught her proper manners and how to set a table like a nobility. Elena thought she lived in an apartment building full of beautiful aunts who worked night shifts at a restaurant. She didn't understand why men's voices sometimes drifted up through the floorboards, or why her aunts wore so much makeup and perfume before going to work. The women became masters of distraction and misdirection, whisking Elena away for walks when certain clients arrived, reading her stories with animated voices that drowned out sounds from below. By age 7, Elena could recite poetry, perform basic mathematics, and argue philosophy with the passion of someone much older. Veronique had discovered that the girl was brilliant, absorbing knowledge like parched earth absorbs rain. "She's special," Veronique told Margot one evening. "Truly special. Her mind works differently, faster. She sees connections between things that most adults miss." "Then we need to do more," Margot replied. "Intelligence like that, in circumstances like these, is either a gift or a curse. We need to make sure it's a gift." The women began pooling money, hiding coins in a tin box beneath the floorboards. Every spare franc went into Elena's future. They called it the Freedom Fund. They stopped buying new dresses, made their own meals instead of ordering from the cafe, mended clothes until they were more patchy than the original fabric. The clients never knew that the women serving them were saving every possible penny to send a little girl to school. When Elena turned 8, Margot enrolled her in the parish school 3 streets away, claiming to be her grandmother. The nuns accepted the story because Margot paid the fees in advance, and Elena's test scores were remarkable. Every morning, Elena walked to school dressed in a clean uniform that 7 women had taken turns washing, ironing, and mending by candlelight. Every evening, she returned to her 3rd-floor room where her aunts asked about her day with genuine fascination, living vicariously through her innocent adventures in a world they could never fully join. Elena never questioned why her grandmother looked different from other grandmothers, or why her aunts never came to school events. Children accept the reality they're given, especially when that reality is filled with love.
Elena was 12 when she first understood that her world was built on lies. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October when autumn rain hammered the streets and turned the city gray. She'd come home early from school because a pipe had burst in the building, flooding 2 classrooms. Margot wasn't expecting her. None of them were. Elena climbed the stairs quietly, as she'd been taught, not wanting to disturb her aunts, who might be sleeping. But as she reached the 2nd-floor landing, she heard crying. Not sad crying, heat-wrenching crying, the kind that makes your stomach clench even when you don't understand why. She crept toward the sound, breaking the unspoken rule about never going to the 2nd floor during work hours. The door to Claudette's room was slightly open.
Through the gap, Elena saw her aunt's face, makeup smeared, dress torn at the shoulder. A man's voice, slurred and angry. "I paid for a good time, not your attitude." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. She watched Claudette force a smile, saw her aunt's hands shake as she poured the man more wine. "Of course, monsieur. I apologize. Please, make yourself comfortable." Understanding crashed over Elena like a wave. Not complete understanding, she was still too young for that, but enough. Enough to know that the restaurant's story was a lie. Enough to realize that the men who came to the house weren't patrons of a dining establishment. Enough to understand that her beautiful aunts were doing something that made them cry when the clients left. She backed away silently, climbed to her third-floor room, and sat on her bed staring at a crack in the ceiling she'd never noticed before. Hours passed. When Margot finally came to check on her, Elena was still sitting in the same position, her school satchel abandoned by the door. "You came home early?" Margot's voice was careful, reading her face like a book. "What do you do? What do they all do? Really?" The silence stretched between them like taffy pulled too thin. Margot sat down on the bed, and for the first time in Elena's memory, her grandmother looked old, tired, defeated. "We survived," Margot said finally, "in the only way women like us can in a world that doesn't offer many choices." She reached for Elena's hand, but the girl pulled away. "You're prostitutes." Elena had learned the word from a book, though she'd never connected it to her reality until now. "This is a brothel. I live in a brothel." "You live in a home," Margot corrected firmly. "A home where 7 women love you more than life itself. A home where every single person has sacrificed their own comfort, their own dignity, their own futures to make sure you have something better. Yes, we sell our bodies, but we've never sold our souls, and we've never, ever sold yours." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Everyone at school thinks I'm respectable. They think you're my grandmother and we're poor but decent. If they knew, they won't know. We've made sure of that. We've protected you since the day you were born." Margot's voice turned fierce. "Your mother died bringing you into this world. Her last words were, 'Save her.' Not from death, Elena, from this life, from ending up like us. We've kept that promise for 12 years and we'll keep it until you're free of this place entirely." "Why? Why would you do all this for me?" Margot cupped her face with both hands, forcing eye contact. "Because you're proof that something good can come from this place. Because raising you, watching you learn and grow and dream has given us a purpose beyond just surviving. Because every time you come home from school talking about books and numbers and ideas, we remember that the world is bigger than these walls. You're not a burden, little one. You're our hope." After that October afternoon, nothing changed visibly, but everything changed internally. Elena stopped being a child and started being a conspirator. She understood now that her education, her innocence, her future, all of it was being purchased at a terrible cost. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. She began to notice things she'd been too young or too sheltered to see before. How Veronique limped on Wednesdays after Tuesday night clients. How Sophie wore turtlenecks to hide bruises that makeup couldn't cover. How Margot took pills for headaches that never seemed to go away. How all of them smiled for her with an intensity that felt desperate now that she understood what they were smiling through. The women knew she knew. It hung between them like an unspoken pact. They never discussed it directly, but the dynamic shifted. Elena studied harder, bringing home perfect marks like offerings at an altar. Each A+ was her way of saying, "Your sacrifice matters." Each award, each teacher's praise, was proof that their suffering was building towards something worthy. At 13, Elena discovered medicine through a book Veronique brought home, a medical encyclopedia with detailed illustrations and clinical descriptions of the human body. She devoured it in 3 days, then read it again more slowly. The precision fascinated her. The idea that bodies had systems and rules, that suffering could be diagnosed and treated with knowledge and skill, rather than luck and prayer, it felt like a form of magic that actually worked. "I want to be a doctor," she announced one evening at dinner. The 7 women froze mid-bite. Claudette recovered first. "That's wonderful, dear, but medical school is very expensive." "I know. How much do we have in the Freedom Fund?"
The women exchanged glances. Margot cleared her throat. "Enough for nursing school, perhaps. Medical school it's for the wealthy, Elena, for people with connections and family names. Women barely get accepted even when they have those things. Then I'll be the exception." Elena's voice didn't waver. "You've all been exceptions your whole lives. You've raised me to be exceptional in a place where I shouldn't even exist. So I'll do the impossible thing. I'll do it because you can't. I'll do it because you've given me the chance." Veronique wiped her eyes. 7 more years until you finish secondary school. That's 7 more years to save. We can do it. We'll do it. They doubled their efforts. Margot raised prices for the first time in 5 years. Claudette started taking clients she'd previously refused. Older men, cruder men, but men who paid better. Sophie sold her mother's pearls, the last thing of value she owned. Veronique stopped buying books for herself entirely. They ate less, worked more, smiled through pain that would have broken most people. And Elena studied. She studied like her life depended on it, because now she understood that it wasn't just her life, it was all of theirs. Every hour she spent with her head in a textbook was an hour validated for every hour they spent with their dignity in pieces. Their suffering would mean something. She would make it mean something. Elena was 15 when Monsieur Laurent started visiting the house. He was different from the other clients, richer, with tailored suits and expensive cologne that lingered in the hallways like a threat. He preferred Sophie because Sophie could fake aristocracy better than the others, could discuss literature and art while pouring wine with practiced grace. But after 3 months, Laurent started asking questions about the house, about the women, about sounds he heard from the 3rd floor, a young girl's voice humming while she studied. Margot tried to deflect. "A niece. She visits sometimes. She seems to visit every day. In fact, every evening. I'm curious about this niece. I'm a man who appreciates youth." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Sophie, who'd been refilling his glass, went rigid. "She's not available." Everything is available for the right price. That night, after Laurent left, the women held an emergency meeting in Margot's room. Elena, studying algebra in her room above, heard raised voices for the first time in her life. She crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "We send her away," Claudette said. "Tonight, before he comes back." "Where?" Margot's voice was strained. "We have nowhere to send her that's safe. And if we suddenly have no niece, Laurent will know we're hiding something. Men like him, they're predators. They hunt what runs." "Then we tell him she's sick," Veronique suggested. "Contagious. Tuberculosis. Men like him are cowards about disease." "Or," Sophie said quietly, "I handle it. I'll convince him she's not worth his interest. I can be persuasive when necessary." "No." Margot's voice turned to steel. "None of us handle it that way. We've protected her for 15 years. We're not stopping now." Elena's hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles went white. She knew her aunts protected her. She hadn't understood they might have to protect her from monsters who looked like gentlemen. The next week, Laurent returned. Sophie met him at the door with a performance worthy of the theater. Elena, hiding in Veronique's room with orders to stay absolutely silent, heard every word through the thin walls. "Your niece," Laurent began. "Is gone," Sophie interrupted smoothly. "Sent away to a convent school in Switzerland. Her grandmother decided she needed more structure. You know how young girls are. Rebellious, difficult. The nuns will straighten her out." "Switzerland," Laurent said, in a tone that suggested he didn't believe a word. "How convenient. Isn't it? Now,
You came here for my company, not to discuss my absent relatives. Shall we go upstairs?" For 3 hours, Elena sat frozen in Veronique's room, listening to the sounds of Sophie sacrificing another piece of herself to keep the lie alive. When Laurent finally left, Sophie emerged from her room moving like broken glass held together by wire. She locked eyes with Margot and said only, "He'll be back, and he won't believe it forever." They had to accelerate their plans. Elena was enrolled in a boarding school on the city's edge, funded by everything the women could scrape together and some things they borrowed from a loan shark at interest rates that would take years to repay. Elena would come home only on Sundays when Laurent never visited. It wasn't perfect, but it was safer. The day Elena left for boarding school, all 7 women stood on the front step waving goodbye like mothers sending a daughter off to war. In a way, they were. The war was for her future, and they were fighting it with their bodies as weapons and their hope as ammunition. Boarding school was hell disguised as education. The girls there came from families with money and titles, families who sent their daughters away to be polished into marriageable assets. Elena arrived with second-hand uniforms and no family story that made sense. "My grandmother runs a boarding house" wasn't technically a lie, but the way she said it made the other girls smell blood in the water. They sensed she was different, poor, other. They made sure she knew it. "Where's your mother?" asked Marguerite Dupont, whose father owned 3 factories. "Dead," Elena said flatly. "And your father?" "Unknown." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Unknown father, dead mother, grandmother who ran a boarding house. The girls didn't need to know the details to understand the implication. Whispers followed Elena through the halls like ghosts. But Elena had been raised by women who survived shame daily with their heads high. She'd learned from masters of dignity in impossible circumstances. So when Marguerite accidentally spilled ink on Elena's only good dress, Elena wore it stained. When Catherine Beaumont started a rumor that Elena's grandmother was actually a drunk who ran a tavern, Elena smiled and said, "At least she runs something. What does your mother do besides spend your father's money?" The academic work was the only place Elena could prove her worth beyond doubt. She demolished every examination, topped every class. Mathematics, sciences, literature, she excelled at everything with a ferocity that intimidated even the teachers. By the end of her first term, she'd earned a grudging respect from her classmates. She was strange and poor and possibly the product of scandal, but she was undeniably brilliant. On Sundays, Elena took the tram home to the House of Red Doors. Those visits became sacred. She'd arrive at noon, and the women would cook a feast with whatever they could afford. They'd sit around the table, the same table where they counted their shame money during the week, and for a few hours, they'd be a family. Elena would tell them about her classes, careful to skip over the parts about bullying and loneliness. They'd tell them about books they'd read, careful to skip over the parts about clients who got violent or police who demanded bribes. They were all lying to each other out of love. "How much longer?" Elena asked one Sunday during her second year. "How much more money do we need for medical school?" Margot pulled out the ledger where she tracked every franc. 3 more years if we maintain our current rate. 2 years if... She trailed off. If what? If we take on more clients, more nights, more... She couldn't finish the sentence. Elena stared at the numbers, at the cost of her dream written in her aunt's suffering. "What if I work? During summers? I could..." "No!" All 7 women spoke in unison. Veronique continued, "You study. That's your job. That's the only job we want you to ever do until you're doing it in a hospital, saving lives. Promise us." "But promise us," Elena's voice broke. "Let us do this our way. Let us give you this gift. It's the only thing we have to give that matters. Elena promised, even though the promise tasted like ash.
Elena was 17, in her final year of secondary school, when Monsieur Laurent returned. He'd stayed away for 2 years, but he hadn't forgotten. Men like him never forget something they've decided they want. He arrived on a Tuesday evening, unannounced, pushing past Margot at the door. "Where is she?" "I told you, Switzerland." "Liar." Laurent's voice was silk over steel. "I made inquiries. There's no Elena Marchand, any Swiss convent school. So I'll ask again, where is the girl?" The other women appeared in doorways, forming an unconscious barrier. Laurent laughed. How touching. The whores protecting their little secret. Does she know what you are? Does she understand that she's being raised by degenerates? "She understands," Margot said coldly, "that she's loved, which is more than you've ever experienced. You pathetic creature who has to buy women because none would choose you freely." Laurent's face darkened. He stepped forward, and that's when Sophie moved. She'd been the prettiest once, the one who commanded the highest prices. Now she uses those looks like a weapon. "Monsieur, you're wasting your time. The girl isn't here, but I am, and I've missed you." She touched his arm with practiced seduction. Laurent hesitated, torn between prey and available conquest. Sophie leaned close, whispering something in his ear that made him smile. She led him upstairs, and as she passed Margot, she mouthed, "Get her out." Margot understood instantly. She grabbed her coat and headed out into the night, toward the boarding school. They'd move Elena tonight, somewhere farther, somewhere Laurent would never think to look. But Laurent had planned ahead. His driver blocked Margot's path on the street. "Monsieur Laurent suggests you wait. He'll want to speak with you when he's finished with your girl upstairs." Margot's blood turned to ice. "Sophie's not a girl. She's 27. The driver's smile was ugly. "Not that one. The other one. The one hiding in the attic." Time stopped. Laurent had somehow learned Elena was home today. Someone had talked, or he'd been watching, waiting. Margot ran back to the house, taking the stairs 3 at a time. She could hear shouting from above, Elena's voice high and terrified, and Laurent's laugh. The third-floor door was locked from inside. Margot pounded on it. "Elena, open the door!" "She's busy," Laurent's voice called through the wood, "learning what women in this house are really for. Don't worry, I'll be gentle. She's young, but—" The sound that followed was unexpected. A crash. A scream, male, not female. Then silence. When the door opened, Elena stood there holding a fireplace poker, blood on her hands, Laurent crumpled behind her, clutching his head. She looked at Margot with eyes that had aged a decade in minutes. "He touched me," she said in a voice that shook. "He said I was already ruined by living here, that I might as well accept my destiny. So I hit him." Margot looked past Elena at Laurent, who was groaning, stunned, but very much alive and very angry. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Men like Laurent had connections, money, power. They'd been protecting Elena from their world, but tonight their world had crashed into hers, and there would be consequences. "We have to leave," Margot said. "All of us. Right now." But it was too late. Police were already at the door, called by Laurent's driver, and Laurent was screaming about assault, attempted murder, a dangerous girl raised by criminals. The story he told was technically true, but completely dishonest. Elena had hit him, but only to defend herself. Still, the law didn't always care about truth. They arrested Elena that night. As police led her in handcuffs, she looked back at 7 women crying on the steps, and she understood something profound. This was the price of loving someone in a world that saw some lives as disposable. Her aunts had protected her for 17 years. Now she'd have to protect herself.
The trial lasted 3 days and destroyed what was left of Elena's carefully constructed, respectable life. Laurent's lawyer painted her as a seductress, a criminal in training, a girl so corrupted by growing up in a brothel that she was incapable of civilized behavior. Elena's court-appointed lawyer was 70 years old and had given up on life decades earlier. On day 2, the prosecutor called Margot to the stand. "You run a brothel, do you not, madame?" "I run a house where women work to survive." "The same house where the defendant was raised?" "Yes." "So you raised a child in a place where prostitution occurs nightly. You think this constitutes proper child-rearing?" Margot's hands gripped the witness box. "I think I raised a brilliant, compassionate young woman against impossible odds. I think every woman in that house sacrificed everything to make sure Elena had chances we never had. I think—" "Objection!" Laurent's lawyer stood. "The witness is making speeches, not answering questions." "Sustained." The judge looked tired. "Answer the questions directly, madame." On day 3, they called Elena to testify. She wore a borrowed dress that didn't fit quite right and had braided her hair to look younger than her 17 years. The prosecutor circled her like a predator. "You hit Monsieur Laurent with a fireplace poker, did you not?" "Yes." "Hard enough to cause bleeding and a concussion?" "Yes." "And you claim this was self-defense?" She met his eyes. "He came into my room. He grabbed me. He said I was already ruined by living here, that I might as well accept my destiny. So I hit him." "That's not a crime. That's survival. In civilized society, we call the police when we feel threatened. We don't resort to violence." "In civilized society," Elena shot back, her voice suddenly strong, "we don't prey on teenage girls. We don't blame women for men's violence. But I'm learning maybe we don't live in a civilized society after all. Maybe we live in a society that protects men like Monsieur Laurent and punishes girls like me for fighting back." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Laurent's face went purple with rage. And in the gallery, 7 women who'd spent their lives being quiet stood up and began to clap. Other women joined them. Victims, survivors, women who'd spent years being told their trauma was their fault. The clapping spread like fire until half the courtroom was standing, applauding a 17-year-old girl who dared to tell the truth. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! I will have an order!" The verdict came 2 hours later. Guilty of assault, but with mitigating circumstances. Elena was sentenced to 6 months in a juvenile facility, followed by mandatory community service. It was better than prison, but worse than freedom. Her dreams of medical school crumbled like ash in her hands. That night, in the holding cell before transfer, Margot visited. "This isn't the end," she said fiercely. "This is just a delay. Medical schools don't accept criminals." Elena's voice was hollow. "They accept people who overcome incredible odds. They accept people who refuse to give up. You are both of those things." Margot pressed an envelope through the bars. "The Freedom Fund. All of it. For when you get out. We'll rebuild it. We'll start over. But you will go to medical school. I don't care if I have to work until I'm 90.
16 years later, Dr. Elena Marchand completed the surgery that had begun this story. 6 hours, 47 minutes. The patient's heart beat steadily under her repairs, blood flowing through newly repaired valves. Perfect. She'd done it perfectly. "Excellent work, doctor." The chief surgeon nodded with approval. "Textbook execution." Elena peeled off her gloves, exhaustion and triumph warring in her chest. Nothing about her life had been textbook. Everything had been improvisation, survival, and sheer determination. She found Margot in the waiting room, asleep in an uncomfortable chair, despite the receptionist's earlier judgment. Elena touched her shoulder gently. Margot's eyes opened, instantly alert in the way people who've lived hard lives always are. Is it done? It's done. The patient will recover fully. Margot stood, and Elena noticed how much smaller she seemed now, how age had finally caught up to a woman who'd been invincible for so long. I'm proud of you, Margot said simply. They walked out of the hospital into morning sunshine. The others wanted to come, Margot said. But Sophie's heap is bad. Veronique is in the countryside with her sister now. Claudette... I know. Elena linked her arm through Margot's. I visit them all, remember? Just last month. Still, they wanted to be here for your first solo heart surgery. They've been here for every important moment of my life, Elena said. They were here when it mattered. When I came out of juvenile detention with a criminal record and no prospects. When universities kept rejecting my applications because of my background. When I finally got accepted to nursing school and worked my way up to pre-med through sheer force of will. When I topped my medical school class despite professors who thought I didn't belong. They were always here even when they weren't physically present. They stopped at a cafe and Elena ordered croissants and coffee. Do you remember what you told me the night of my arrest? About redemption? I said your success was our redemption. You were wrong. You didn't need redemption. You never did. You took a newborn baby born into the worst circumstances and loved her so fiercely that she became a doctor. You sacrificed everything, dignity, comfort, safety, to give me chances you never had. That's not something that needs redeeming. That's something holy. Margot's eyes filled with tears. We did unspeakable things, Elena. We sold our bodies. You survived, and you made sure I could do more than survive. The world will judge you for how you earned money, but I judge you by how you spent it. On books, on school fees, on believing a girl from a brothel could become a surgeon. She gripped her hands. You were never the whores people called you. You were mothers, all 7 of you. The best mothers I could have asked for. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking coffee as the city woke up around them. Finally, Margot asked, What happens now? Now, I operate. I save lives. And I never, ever forget who made it possible. Elena smiled. I'm starting a foundation for children in difficult circumstances, children who need protection, education, a chance at something better. I'm calling it the Red Doors Foundation. Margot looked up sharply. Elena, the name, people might understand the reference. It might hurt your reputation. Good, Elena said firmly. Let them understand. Let them know that a girl raised in a brothel became a surgeon. Let them know that the women they dismissed as worthless raised someone who saves lives. Let them see that their judgment means nothing compared to love and determination and sacrifice. I'm not hiding where I came from anymore. I'm celebrating it. You are braver than all of us combined. No, Elena corrected. I'm brave because of all of you combined. You taught me that survival with dignity is the highest form of courage, that protecting others at cost to yourself is the definition of love, that society's opinion matters less than living with integrity. I learned all of that in the House of Red Doors. They finished their coffee and walked back towards Margot's apartment, a small, clean place that Elena had rented for her the day she'd received her first paycheck. Along the way, they passed the old building that had housed the brothel. It was boarded up now, the red door faded to pink, graffiti covering the walls. Elena stopped and looked at it. Do you miss it? Margot asked. Every day, Elena admitted. Not the place, but that time when we were all together, when I was young enough to believe that your love could protect me from everything. It did protect you. Just not from everything, but enough. Elena turned away from the building, towards the future. They want me on the surgical board at the hospital, youngest appointment in the institution's history.
Margot's face lit up with pride that could have illuminated the entire street. "When do you start?" "Next month. And I've already told them my first initiative. A scholarship program for medical students from unconventional backgrounds. Students who've been incarcerated. Students from poverty. Students who've survived things that should have destroyed them, but instead made them stronger." Elena's voice grew fierce. The board was uncomfortable with the idea. They said medicine requires people of good character. I told them I'd never met anyone with better character than 7 women who worked in a brothel and raised a daughter who became a surgeon. "You didn't?" Margot's hand flew to her mouth. "I did." There was a long silence. Then the chief of surgery, the one who supervised my operation today, stood up and said his grandmother had been a seamstress in a garment factory where women traded sexual favors to supervisors just to keep their jobs. He said she raised his father in a tenement where rats were more common than food. He said if we only accepted doctors from perfect circumstances, we'd have a profession full of people who'd never truly understood suffering. The vote passed, barely, but it passed. They reached Margot's building, and Elena helped her up the stairs that were getting harder for her to climb. Inside the apartment, photographs covered every surface. Elena at her secondary school graduation, Elena in her nursing school uniform, Elena on her first day of medical school, Elena in her white coat at the hospital. A shrine to the impossible made possible. "The others are coming for dinner tonight," Margot said, settling into her chair with a small grunt of pain. "I hope you can stay." "I wouldn't miss it." Elena moved to the kitchen to start preparing food. This had become their ritual. Once a month, the women who had raised her gathered here, and Elena cooked for them, a reversal of all those Sundays when they'd fed her while hiding their own hunger. Sophie arrived first, moving slowly with her cane, her once beautiful face now a roadmap of a hard life survived. But her eyes were still sharp, still seeing everything. "Our little doctor," she said, pulling Elena into a hug that smelled like lavender and old perfume. "Did the surgery go well?" "Perfect. No complications." "Of course not. We didn't raise you to do anything halfway." Claudette came next, with Veronique leaning on her arm. Veronique had suffered a stroke 3 years ago and now spoke slowly, searching for words that used to come so easily. But she still read voraciously, and she still asked Elena about medical journals with genuine intellectual curiosity. The others followed. Simone, who'd been quiet but steady through Elena's entire childhood. Marie, who'd taught her to braid hair and to stand up straight, even when the world tried to make you bow. And finally, Beatrice, the youngest, who'd been only 19 when Elena was born and was now just 45 but looked 60 from years of rough living. They gathered around Margot's small table, squeezing in close like they'd done around that other table in another life. Elena served the meal she'd prepared: roast chicken, vegetables, bread that was actually fresh instead of day-old. Simple food, but abundant. No one had to pretend they weren't hungry anymore. "Tell us about the surgery," Veronique said slowly, working hard to form each word. "Every detail." So Elena did. She described the procedure with clinical precision, but also with passion. The beauty of a heart's architecture, the satisfaction of repairing something broken, the sacred responsibility of holding someone's life in your hands. The women listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed they'd been paying attention to medicine for years through Elena's stories. "Your mother would have been proud," Margot said quietly when Elena finished. The table went silent. They rarely mentioned Isabel. It was too painful, too complicated. A woman who'd died giving Elena life, who'd had only minutes to know her daughter existed. "I've never really asked. Who was she?" Elena said suddenly. The women exchanged glances. Finally, Sophie spoke. "She was young, 22. She'd come to the house 6 months before she got pregnant. She'd been a governess for a wealthy family, but the man of the house forced himself on her. When his wife found out, she threw Isabel into the street with nothing. No references, no money, no options."
So she ended up at the Red Doors, Claudette continued, like most of us. Not because we wanted to, but because society closes every other door when a woman falls from grace. She was smart, like you. She read constantly. She was saving money, planning to leave, to start over somewhere new. Then she got pregnant, Marie said softly. Client refused to admit it was his. She tried to hide it, kept working as long as she could. We all knew, of course. We were planning to help her, to figure something out. But the labor came early, too fast. She was terrified, Margot said, her voice thick with memory. Not of dying. She seemed to know that was coming. But terrified of what would happen to you. Her last words weren't save me. They were save her. She made us promise, all of us, to protect you from this life. Elena felt tears sliding down her face. I wish I could have known her. You did, in a way, Veronique said carefully. Everything good in you, your brilliance, your determination, your compassion, those were her gifts. She lives in you. And we tried to give you what she couldn't. 7 mothers, instead of 1. It's not the same, but it was enough, Elena interrupted. It was more than enough. You gave me everything. They ate in companionable silence for a while, passing dishes and pouring wine. Then Simone, who'd rarely spoken at gatherings, cleared her throat. I need to say something I should have said years ago. Everyone looked at her. Simone's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. When Elena was arrested, when everything fell apart, I blamed myself. I was the one who told Laurent's driver that she was home that Sunday. I didn't know. I thought he was asking out of politeness, making conversation. I didn't realize he was gathering information for Laurent. That mistake led to everything that happened. The table went quiet. Elena stared at her aunt, processing this revelation. I've carried that guilt for 16 years, Simone continued, tears streaming down her weathered face. I've watched you fight so hard to become a doctor, and I've known that you had to fight through a criminal record because of my careless words. I'm so sorry, Elena. I would undo it if I could. Elena stood and walked around the table. She knelt beside Simone's chair and took her hands. Aunt Simone, look at me. She waited until the older woman met her eyes. If that night hadn't happened, I would have gone to medical school 3 years earlier, yes, but I wouldn't have understood suffering the same way. I wouldn't have known what it feels like to be judged by circumstances instead of character. I wouldn't have learned that the legal system protects power, not justice. Those lessons made me a better doctor, a more compassionate doctor, a doctor who sees patients instead of just cases. But you suffered. I suffered, I agreed, but I also survived. And I learned that suffering doesn't destroy you if you refuse to let it. You taught me that, all of you. Every single day of my childhood, you showed me that dignity isn't about circumstances, it's about choices. You chose to raise me with love in a place designed to crush it. That was remarkable. That was heroic. So, no, Aunt Simone, I don't blame you for one mistake. I thank you for 17 years of protecting me from countless others. Simone pulled Elena into a fierce hug, both women crying now. Around the table, tissues appeared, and 7 women who'd seen too much and survived too long let themselves weep for pain finally acknowledged and forgiven. When they'd all composed themselves, Margot raised her wine glass. A toast. To Isabel, who gave us Elena. To each other, for keeping our promise. And to Elena, for making everything we endured mean something beautiful. To Elena, they echoed, glasses clinking. No, Elena said, raising her own glass. To all of us. To the House of Red Doors, and the women who turned it into a home. To the family that society said couldn't exist, but did anyway. to love that survived in impossible soil and bloomed into something extraordinary. They drink, and in that moment, the weight of decades of shame and suffering lifted just slightly. Not erased. Nothing could erase what they had endured, but transformed, redeemed not by forgetting, but by creating something beautiful from something broken. After dinner, Elena walked each woman to the door, hugging them goodbye with promises to visit soon. When only Margot remained, Elena helped her into bed, tucking the blankets around her like Margot had once tucked blankets around a small girl in an attic room. "I'm tired," Margot admitted. "More tired than I used to be." "I know. But you can rest now. You did what you set out to do. You saved me. You kept your promise to my mother. We all did. Best thing we ever did. Only thing that really mattered in the end." Elena stayed until Margot's breathing deepened into sleep. Then she let herself out quietly, locking the door behind her. Outside, the city hummed with evening life, people heading to restaurants, couples walking hand in hand, normal people living normal lives without any idea of the extraordinary stories hiding in plain sight. She walked back towards the hospital where her shift would begin again in 10 hours, past the boarded-up building that used to be the House of Red Doors, past the boarding school where she'd learned to fight with knowledge instead of fists, past the courthouse where she'd been convicted, and the jail where she'd served time, past all the places that had tried to define her and failed. Dr. Elena Marchand, surgeon, daughter of 7 mothers, living proof that love and determination could overcome anything. That society's judgments were meaningless compared to the fierce protection of women who refused to let one more girl be destroyed by circumstances. The red doors were closed now, boarded and forgotten by everyone except the people who lived behind them. But what those doors had protected, the impossible dream of a better life, the radical act of loving someone enough to sacrifice everything, that would never close. That would live on in every surgery Elena performed, every student she mentored, every policy she changed to make room for people from unconventional paths. The House of Red Doors had been torn down, but what it built could never be destroyed. Elena paused at the hospital entrance and looked up at the building where she now belonged, where she'd earned her place through talent and grit and the foundation of love that 7 women had poured into her against impossible odds. She thought of her mother, Isabel, who she'd never known, but who she carried in every cell. She thought of Margot, Sophie, Claudette, Veronique, Simone, Marie, and Beatrice, the women who'd raised her with nothing but determination and love. She thought of the girl she'd been, innocent and protected in an attic room, the teenager who'd defended herself with a fireplace poker, the young woman who'd studied medical textbooks in a juvenile detention cell, the doctor she'd become against every odd. "Thank you," she whispered to the ghosts of all her past selves, to the women who'd made this possible, to the mother she'd never met who'd given her life with her last breath. Then Dr. Elena Marchand walked through the hospital doors to save more lives, carrying the legacy of the House of Red Doors into a future that would never know its name, but would benefit from its love forever.
If you're watching this from your home tonight, wherever you are in the world, I want you to remember something. This is a story about people society threw away who raised someone extraordinary. It's about women who were judged for how they survived, but should have been celebrated for what they protected. We all know someone who's been judged unfairly. Someone who's survived impossible circumstances. Someone whose worth can't be measured by society's narrow standards. This story is for them. And maybe, if you're honest, it's for parts of you too. The parts that have survived things you don't talk about, that have fought battles no one saw, that have loved fiercely even when the world said you had no right to. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. And if this story moved you, share it. Because stories like this, Stories about survival and redemption and love that refuses to die, they need to be told. They need to be heard. Until next time, remember, you are more than your circumstances. You are more than society's judgment. You are more than what happened to you. You are what you choose to become despite it all.